In this video, we will discuss the movie Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. We will go through the storyline, summarize the plot, and explore the cast and characters. Additionally, we will cover the movie's production details and its box office performance. Finally, we will share reviews and give a personal reaction. So, let's get started. The film is a critically acclaimed sequel to Rise of the Planet of the Apes. It had a very strong opening, earning around $73 million at the domestic box office, which was far ahead of the $54 million debut of Rise of the Planet of the Apes back in August 2011. This continued the studio's winning streak during the summer season. However, despite the film's successful opening, overall American box office revenue saw a decline of nearly 24% compared to the same weekend in 2013. Still, 20th Century Fox enjoyed a very successful summer and became one of the first major Hollywood studios to cross a huge revenue milestone in 2014 domestic ticket sales. This success was largely supported by other big hits like X-Men, Days of Future Past and The Fault in Our Stars. Internationally, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes opened with approximately $31 million from its first 26 markets, bringing its worldwide total to over $104 million early on. Major contributions came from markets like South Korea and Australia, where it earned about $1.4 million and $6.6 million respectively. The movie was still waiting to release in many parts of the world, as some launches were delayed due to scheduling issues and global events like the FIFA World Cup. The film received strong praise from critics. Many described it as an incredibly satisfying cinematic experience and one of the rare sequels that truly lives up to expectations. It was directed by Matt Reeves, who successfully continued the story with deeper emotional impact and strong storytelling. The story follows Caesar, the intelligent ape leader, who has built a peaceful community in the forest along with hundreds of genetically evolved apes. They live in harmony until they are suddenly threatened by a group of human survivors who managed to escape a deadly global virus. As humans and apes come into contact, tension begins to rise. Both sides initially attempt to build trust and maintain peace, but fear, misunderstanding, and internal conflicts lead to a dangerous situation. This raises a critical question: can peace be restored, or is war inevitable? Ultimately, the future of Earth depends on which species will emerge as the dominant one. The movie attracted a wide audience. About 55% of viewers were male, while a significant portion of the audience also included female viewers. The film also showed diversity in its audience demographics, with strong engagement across different groups. The movie was developed and produced by 20th Century Fox, with an estimated budget of around $170 million. It is set several years after the events of the first film, continuing the rebooted franchise in a more serious and emotional direction. The human cast includes actors like Jason Clarke, Keri Russell, and Oldman, while the iconic ape characters were brought to life using advanced motion capture technology. This technology received widespread praise for its realism and emotional depth, making the apes feel incredibly lifelike. The film was also released in 3D and maintained strong performance after its opening weekend. Even though some films dropped significantly, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes showed stability and continued to earn solid numbers. Other films in the market at the time, including comedies and documentaries, performed moderately, but none matched the impact of this movie. For example, some films had smaller earnings and limited releases, while others expanded slowly across theaters. Overall, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes secured the #1 spot at the box office during its opening weekend, earning around $74 million domestically. This performance exceeded expectations, which were initially set around $60 million, and also surpassed the opening of Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Industry experts described the film's success as a perfect storm of strong storytelling, audience interest, and positive reviews. The combination of these factors helped create a phenomenal opening and long-term success. At the same time, smaller films like Boyhood, which was filmed over 12 years, received critical acclaim and performed well in limited release. Although its total earnings were smaller compared to big-budget films, its per-screen average was very strong, showing high audience interest. In conclusion, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes proved to be one of the most successful and impactful films of its time. With strong box office numbers, positive reviews, and groundbreaking visual effects, it stands out as a major achievement in modern cinema. Meanwhile, Transformers: Age of Extinction took second place, crossing the $200 million mark domestically and continuing to perform strongly overseas. On the other hand, Tammy, starring Melissa McCarthy, dropped further down the rankings. Both of these films received largely negative reviews from critics. In contrast, Fox's critically acclaimed sequel Dawn of the Planet of the Apes easily dominated the domestic box office this weekend with a powerful debut of around $73 million. This was well ahead of the $54 million opening of Rise of the Planet of the Apes back in August 2011. The film was directed by Matt Reeves, with Andy Serkis returning in the role of Caesar, the intelligent ape leader who has built a community deep within the forests alongside hundreds of genetically evolved apes and primates. Coming in second place at the North American box office was Paramount's Transformers: Age of Extinction. Now in its third weekend, the film earned about $17 million domestically, bringing its total to over $200 million. Internationally, Transformers continued to perform exceptionally well, earning an additional $192 million overseas. This pushed its international total to $543 million and its worldwide gross to an impressive $752 million. Melissa McCarthy's comedy Tammy secured third place in its second weekend. Despite its performance, the film struggled due to poor reviews, which affected audience reception. Further down the list, DreamWorks Animation's How to Train Your Dragon 2 remained in the top 5 for the second consecutive week, earning $5.9 million and bringing its domestic total to over $150 million. Overseas, the film added more revenue, reaching around $197 million internationally and a worldwide total of approximately $349 million. In sixth place, Earth to Echo earned an additional $5.5 million in its second weekend, pushing its domestic total to around $24 million. The film had been acquired by Relativity Media for $13 million from Disney. The supernatural horror film Deliver Us from Evil also performed moderately, earning $14.7 million and reaching a domestic total of $25 million. Disney's Maleficent, now in its seventh week, earned $4.2 million domestically, bringing its total to $32 million for that weekend's ranking. Internationally, however, the film performed exceptionally well, reaching $447 million overseas and a massive worldwide total of $669 million. Back to Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, the film roared to the #1 spot with one of the summer's strongest openings. According to studio estimates, it easily surpassed the $54 million debut of the 2011 film, proving the strength of the rebooted franchise. In a summer filled with hype but lacking quality in many cases, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes stood out as one of the rare films that successfully combined both spectacle and substance. After 2 weeks in theaters, Transformers: Age of Extinction continued to hold strong, while Melissa McCarthy's comedy maintained moderate earnings despite negative reviews. Other films like 22 Jump Street and How to Train Your Dragon 2 continued to perform steadily in the box office rankings. The story of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes picks up where Rise of the Planet of the Apes left off. A deadly virus has wiped out most of the human population, leaving only a small number of survivors who managed to avoid infection. During this time, humanity not only battled the disease but also fought among themselves. Now, in this post-apocalyptic world, they are trying to rebuild what they have lost. However, standing in their way is Caesar, a highly intelligent, genetically evolved ape with the ability to speak and lead. He has established a peaceful ape community and prefers to avoid conflict with humans. But the fragile peace between humans and apes does not last long. Tension rises quickly, pushing both sides toward the brink of war. From a fan's perspective, especially for those who followed the Planet of the Apes franchise, this film was highly anticipated. After previous versions left mixed reactions, this reboot sequel truly delivers on expectations. The film immediately brings viewers up to speed with the events of the previous installment and wastes no time diving into its core themes. It explores deep and meaningful themes such as survival, trust, prejudice, and coexistence between humans and apes. The interactions between both communities are filled with tension, emotion, and realism. The apes are shown as highly organized, with their own laws, hunting techniques, traditions, and strong sense of community. On the other hand, humans are desperate to restore electricity and rebuild their civilization. The conflict grows due to misunderstandings, fear, and past experiences. Certain characters believe humans cannot be trusted, which creates further division and tension. One of the strongest elements of the film is its emotional depth, brilliantly conveyed through Andy Serkis' performance as Caesar. His character adds heart and realism, making the film stand out. At its core, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is a story about power, leadership, and survival. One of the most intense highlights of the film is the confrontation between Caesar and Kodi, which represents the clash of ideologies and ultimately determines the fate of both species. Caesar is now fully grown and has built a family of his own, a wife, a teenage son, and a newborn baby. Everything he does is focused on teaching them, protecting them, and ensuring their survival in a dangerous world. Meanwhile, the film made a strong impact at the domestic box office this weekend, earning impressive numbers and positioning itself as one of the smartest blockbuster releases. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, released by 20th Century Fox, delivered both strong earnings and critical praise. Many critics have described it as one of the best summer popcorn films, a rare case where both critics and audiences agree. This perfect combination created what industry experts call a perfect storm for a phenomenal box office opening. Chris Aronson, president of domestic distribution at 20th Century Fox, stated that many films released in the previous weeks had received mixed or average responses. Because of this, the market was ready for a high-quality, visually stunning film, and this movie delivered exactly that. Once again, it proved to be one of those rare moments when critics and general audiences align, leading to massive success. The film's U.S. debut exceeded expectations, crossing the $60 million mark and even surpassing the $54 million opening of Rise of the Planet of the Apes from 2011. In terms of audience demographics, around 58% of viewers were male, and about 65% were aged 25 or older. At the same time, the film also attracted a slightly younger audience compared to its predecessor. Around 8% of its domestic earnings came from premium large-screen formats, showing strong audience interest in high-quality viewing experiences. The studio also mentioned that older audiences who enjoyed the first film would likely return, helping the movie maintain strong performance over time. The production budget for the film was around $170 million, a cost that the sequel was expected to recover easily, especially considering its strong international performance. With this success, the long-running Planet of the Apes franchise crossed a major global milestone, proving the lasting appeal of its characters and story. The sequel, directed by Matt Reeves, continued the rebooted storyline while maintaining the post-apocalyptic setting of the Bay Area. It introduced a world where human survivors of a global pandemic struggle to adapt, while genetically evolved apes have become the dominant force. The film was produced by Chernin Entertainment and financed by 20th Century Fox. At the same time, in limited release, Richard Linklater's Boyhood made a strong debut, earning $359,000 from just 5 locations in New York and Los Angeles. It achieved one of the highest per-screen averages of the year, second only to the Grand Budapest Hotel, and the highest in Linklater's career. Filmed over a period of 12 years on a budget of around $5 million, Boyhood follows the real-time growth of a young boy into adulthood. It has been widely praised as a remarkable cinematic achievement and received outstanding reviews from critics. Jonathan Saring, president of IFC Films, stated that since the film premiered at Sundance, it has been an incredible journey. He added that the public response has been even better than expected. The film has gained strong awareness, with massive media attention and positive word-of-mouth spreading across social media platforms like Twitter. Due to this momentum, the studio plans to expand its release gradually. Internationally, Boyhood has already opened in several territories, including Germany and the United Kingdom, earning around $3.2 million overseas. Universal Pictures is handling international distribution, while IFC Films manages the domestic release. Transformers: Age of Extinction slipped to the number 2 spot this weekend but still showed strong performance, earning $16.5 million and pushing its domestic total to around $209 million. Internationally, the film continued to dominate, adding massive numbers overseas and reaching approximately $543 million internationally. The film performed exceptionally well in China, where it added another $25 million from the market, setting new records in the country during its second week of release. Overall, its global total continued to rise significantly, proving its strong international appeal compared to its domestic performance. Tammy experienced a drop of about 40%, earning $12.9 million despite receiving poor reviews and a C+ CinemaScore. However, the film still managed to reach $57.3 million after 2 weeks. Although some reports labeled the film as underperforming for Melissa McCarthy, its final numbers are still expected to exceed its $20 million production budget by a large margin. According to Warner Brothers, president of domestic distribution, the film continues to perform well in certain regions, particularly in the South and Midwest. He also mentioned that the movie has a strong fan base that enjoys her style of comedy, and it is expected to finish with around $90 million domestically. Relativity Media's Earth to Echo also held steady, dropping only 34% to earn $2.5 million in its second weekend, bringing its total to $24.6 million. With a modest production budget of $13 million, the film appears to be benefiting from a lack of strong family-oriented competition in the market. In fourth and fifth place, 22 Jump Street earned $6.7 million, pushing its domestic total to $172 million, while How to Train Your Dragon 2 added $5.9 million, bringing its domestic earnings to approximately $132 million. Among limited releases, Begin Again showed growth in its third week, earning $2.9 million from 939 locations and increasing its total to $5.2 million. Meanwhile, the politically driven documentary America added another $1 million, reaching a total of $8.3 million, showing the commercial potential of controversial and discussion-driven content. Although not all numbers are finalized, analysts predict that the summer box office will continue to lag behind last year's record-breaking figures. This particular weekend saw a decline of nearly 25% compared to the same period in 2013, when films like Pacific Rim and Grown Ups 2 were released. Overall, the U.S. box office is currently down by about 5.2%. One major reason behind this decline is the absence of a strong four-quadrant blockbuster like Iron Man 3, which appeals to all audience groups. Additionally, there are fewer mid-range hits in the $80 to $150 million range, a category that last year included films like The Conjuring, which helped strengthen the overall market performance. According to industry analysts, the box office needs a variety of films that can connect with audiences. Studios cannot rely only on big-budget tentpole films. They also need strong mid-level performers to maintain balance. Meanwhile, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes roared to the top with a $73 million opening weekend, making it one of the biggest debuts of the summer. The sequel easily surpassed the $54 million opening of Rise of the Planet of the Apes from 2011. In a summer filled with hype but lacking consistency and quality, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes proved to be one of the few films that successfully combined both spectacle and substance. Directed by Matt Reeves and released in 3D, the film received praise from both critics and audiences, particularly for its groundbreaking motion capture performances by Andy Serkis as Caesar. After 2 weeks at the top, Transformers: Age of Extinction continued to hold strong overall, while Melissa McCarthy's comedy maintained moderate performance despite negative reviews. The relatively low-budget film still managed to reach $57.4 million within 2 weeks. At number 4, 22, Jump Street earned $6.9 million, followed by How to Train Your Dragon 2, which added $5.9 million to its total. This photo, released by 20th Century Fox, shows an image from the film in a summer filled with high expectations but mixed quality. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes has proven to be one of the few films that successfully combines both spectacle and substance. Directed by Matt Reeves, the film has drawn strong praise from both critics and audiences, particularly for its groundbreaking motion capture performances by Andy Serkis, who plays the lead role of Caesar. In the film, Caesar leads a tribe of highly intelligent apes. Their peaceful existence is disrupted when they encounter a colony of surviving humans on a planet now largely ruled by evolved apes. This encounter sets the stage for tension, conflict, and the possibility of war. A sequel, also to be directed by Matt Reeves, is already in development, continuing the expansion of a franchise that originally began with the 1968 classic Planet of the Apes, based on Pierre Boulle's novel. The franchise went on to produce multiple films in the 1970s, followed by a failed reboot in 2001 directed by Tim Burton. However, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes has clearly outperformed many of its predecessors. The film added $31 million overseas from 26 markets, reaching a global opening of approximately $104 million. Industry analysts have praised the film for its intelligence, entertainment value, and strong marketing. One analyst stated that if every summer movie performed like this, it would be an ideal scenario, as the film perfectly combines all the elements of a smart and engaging blockbuster. After 2 weeks at the top, Michael Bay's action sequel Transformers: Age of Extinction followed with $16.5 million, bringing its domestic total to over $200 million for Paramount Pictures. Melissa McCarthy's comedy Tammy came in third place with $12.9 million. Despite negative reviews affecting audience response, the film still managed to earn around $57 million within 2 weeks, making it a profitable project for Warner Brothers. The strong opening of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes gave the summer box office a much-needed boost. However, it was not enough to completely reverse the overall downward trend. The weekend box office was still down nearly 24% compared to the same weekend last year. According to box office trackers, the overall summer performance is down around 20% compared to last year, which had been a record-breaking season for Hollywood. One of the main reasons for this drop is the difference in release patterns. Last year featured multiple big-budget films competing directly with each other, creating more excitement and higher earnings. In contrast, many weekends this summer have had less blockbuster competition. For example, the same weekend last year included major releases like Grown Ups 2 and Pacific Rim, along with strong holdovers like Despicable Me 2 and The Heat. One of the most notable new limited releases this weekend was Richard Linklater's Boyhood, an independent film shot over 12 years. The film captures the real-life growth of a child into adulthood and has received critical acclaim for its unique storytelling approach. At the box office, the latest available figures show the following results. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes led with around $73 million, followed by Transformers: Age of Extinction with $16.5 million, Tammy with $12.9 million, 22, Jump Street: How to Train Your Dragon 2 with $5.9 million, and other films like Earth to Echo and Deliver Us from Evil also contributing to the weekend totals. The success of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes proves that intelligent, well-made films can still dominate the box office. The film opened with $73 million, standing out in a summer filled with high budgets but inconsistent quality. Once again, the movie has been praised for combining spectacle with emotional depth. Directed by Matt Reeves, it has attracted both critics and general audiences, especially due to the powerful motion capture performance by Andy Serkis as Caesar. In the story, Caesar's tribe cautiously encounters a group of human survivors on a planet now dominated by apes. Actors like Jason Clarke and Gary Oldman portray humans who are more peaceful and seek a way to coexist with the apes. During a red carpet premiere, it was mentioned that while the film contains serious and intense moments, it also balances them with lighter elements, making it engaging for a wide audience. When a film receives this kind of response, where both critics and audiences agree on its quality, it becomes something rare and special. As Chris Aronson from Fox explained, it is one of those unique moments where everything comes together perfectly. The sequel, again directed by Matt Reeves, will continue to build on a franchise that started in 1968 and has evolved through decades of storytelling. Compared to earlier installments, this new version is expected to surpass them in both scale and success. With an additional $31 million from international markets, the film's global performance continues to grow. Analysts believe that if more summer films achieved this level of quality and reception, the overall box office would be much stronger. A senior media analyst from Box Office Tracker praised the film for its intelligence, entertainment value, and strong marketing strategy, stating that it combines all the elements of what a smart summer film should be. After 2 weeks at the top, Michael Bay's action sequel Transformers: Age of Extinction moved into second place, earning around $16 million and bringing its domestic total to approximately $209 million for Paramount Pictures. Meanwhile, Melissa McCarthy's comedy Tammy continued its run despite mixed responses. Although the film received negative reviews, the relatively low-budget production still managed to earn around $57 million for Warner Brothers within its first 2 weeks. The strong opening of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes gave the summer box office a much-needed boost. However, it was not enough to completely reverse the overall downward trend. The weekend box office remained down by nearly 24% compared to the same weekend last year. One of the main reasons for this decline is the summer release schedule. Last year featured multiple big-budget films competing directly with each other, creating higher excitement and stronger numbers. In contrast, many weekends this summer have lacked major blockbuster competition. For example, the same weekend last year included major releases like Grown Ups 2 and Pacific Rim, along with strong holdovers such as Despicable Me 2. The most notable new limited release this weekend was Richard Linklater's Boyhood, an independent film shot over a period of 12 years to capture the natural growth and development of its cast. The film received critical acclaim and was released by IFC Films, opening in just 5 theaters but achieving an impressive per-screen average. Looking ahead, 3 new movies were set to hit theaters. Meanwhile, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes was expected to remain at the top of the box office for the second weekend in a row. Early estimates based on Friday performance suggested that the film could earn around $30 million over the weekend, further boosting its domestic total. During its opening weekend, the film had already delivered a strong performance with around $72 to $73 million at the domestic box office. Based on early trends, it continued to show solid momentum. Among other releases, one of the R-rated comedy sequels showed strong early numbers, with opening day earnings projected between $40 to $50 million. Potentially leading to a weekend total near $100 million. Another competing film, however, showed slightly weaker early performance, with projections closer to the $20 million range. At the same time, Disney's Planes, Fire and Rescue entered the market, targeting families and younger audiences. The film earned around $0.5 million from Thursday previews and was projected to reach around $7 to $9 million on its opening day, with a solid weekend total expected. The previous film in the franchise had been a surprise success, earning over $200 million worldwide despite its relatively small budget. This sequel aimed to repeat that success by appealing to family audiences looking for a lighter, animated option. In addition, other films also contributed to the weekend box office. One late-night release earned around $1.1 million after opening in 245 theaters, while another film generated approximately $0.7 million from its early showings. These films were produced by studios such as Columbia Pictures, Media Rights Capital, and Escape Artists. Overall, the weekend showcased a mix of blockbuster hits, mid-range performers, and smaller releases. While Dawn of the Planet of the Apes continued to lead with strong numbers and positive reception, the overall summer box office still faced challenges compared to the previous year, although new wide releases are hitting multiplexes this weekend. Fox's Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is expected to remain at the top of the box office for the second weekend in a row. Early estimates based on Friday performances suggest that director Matt Reeves' sequel could earn around $30 million over the weekend. This would further contribute to its strong 3-day domestic total, following its impressive $72 to $73 million opening weekend. Meanwhile, the sequel to the 2013 horror hit earned about $2 million from Thursday night previews, while Sony's comedy Sex Tape brought in around $1.1 million during its early showings. Based on early trends, one of these films was expected to earn between $12 to $15 million on opening day, potentially leading to a weekend total of around $30 million. The Planet of the Apes franchise is one of the oldest and most iconic science fiction series in Hollywood history. The first film, titled Planet of the Apes, was released in 1968 and starred Charlton Heston as an astronaut who crash lands on a mysterious planet ruled by intelligent apes. In the film, his character experiences both the strengths and the darker aspects of ape civilization, where humans have lost their intelligence and ability to speak. This unique concept made the film stand out and become a major success. Since the late 1960s, the Planet of the Apes franchise has expanded significantly. There are now multiple feature films, along with television series, novels, and comic books. The franchise remains one of the highest-grossing science fiction franchises of all time, with total earnings exceeding billions worldwide. It stands alongside major franchises like Terminator, Alien, and just below Star Trek in terms of long-term impact and box office success. With newer installments, the franchise continues to grow and remains relevant to modern audiences. Much of the success of the franchise is directly connected to the impact of the original 1968 film. Directed by Franklin J. Schaffner and written by Michael Wilson and Rod Serling, the movie combined science fiction with strong social and philosophical themes. The film was a major success both critically and commercially. It was nominated for Academy Awards, including Best Costume Design and Best Original Score. Additionally, John Chambers received an honorary Oscar for his groundbreaking makeup work, which helped bring the apes to life in a realistic way. During its original theatrical run, Planet of the Apes earned nearly $34 million. While this may seem modest by today's standards, at the time it was the highest-grossing science fiction film ever made and one of the most talked-about movies of the late 1960s. Its success even rivaled other major sci-fi releases of that era, including 2001, A Space Odyssey, which was released shortly afterward. Following the massive success of the 1968 film, development of a sequel began almost immediately. 20th Century Fox wanted to release it quickly, which meant that much of the original creative team was not able to return. As a result, the sequel took a different direction. Charlton Heston had limited involvement, and new writers and directors were brought in to continue the story. The sequel, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, was released in 1970. It followed a new astronaut who travels to the same planet in search of the original protagonist. Although the sequel performed well financially due to the popularity of the first film, its reception from critics and audiences was more mixed. Some viewers felt that the story was weaker and less impactful compared to the original. Despite this, the franchise continued to grow, proving its lasting appeal and importance in the history of science fiction cinema. The box office results for Beneath the Planet of the Apes were noticeably lower than the first film, with the movie earning around $17 million during its release. While this was not as strong compared to other major films of the year, it was still considered fairly profitable for 20th Century Fox. The sequel was made on a much smaller budget of around $2.5 million, compared to the $6 million budget of the original film. Because of this reduced cost, the studio was still able to generate solid profits despite the drop in overall box office performance. The next film in the franchise, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, took a completely different approach compared to Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Once again, the turnaround between films was very quick, with Escape being released almost exactly 1 year after its predecessor. This time, the story followed apes traveling back in time to Los Angeles in the year 1973. The concept was almost the reverse of the original film. Instead of humans entering a world ruled by apes, the apes now found themselves in the human world before apes became the dominant species. One of the biggest differences between Escape from the Planet of the Apes and Beneath the Planet of the Apes was the response from critics and audiences. While Beneath received mixed reactions, Escape was seen as a major improvement and is often considered one of the best sequels in the original franchise. Despite the improved reception, the box office numbers continued to decline, with Escape earning around $12 million during its release. However, once again, the film remained profitable due to its even smaller production budget, which dropped to around $2 million. After this period, it would take nearly 30 years for the Planet of the Apes franchise to return to theaters in a major way. The franchise was rebooted in 2001 with a new film directed by Tim Burton. This version was a loose adaptation of the original 1963 novel, featuring a story about an astronaut who crash lands on a planet ruled by intelligent apes. Mark Wahlberg played the lead role, while the apes were portrayed by a strong supporting cast that included Tim Roth, Helena Bonham Carter, and Michael Clarke Duncan. The 2001 Planet of the Apes has a complicated legacy. While it was a commercial success at the box office, it received largely negative reviews from both critics and audiences. Tim Burton himself later expressed dissatisfaction with the project, even stating that he would rather jump out of a window than make a sequel to the film. Despite this, the movie had a strong financial performance. With a budget of around $100 million, it opened with nearly $70 million, making it one of the biggest debuts of the year and the largest July opening at that time. The film went on to earn around $180 million in North America and a total of approximately $362 million worldwide. The takeaway was clear: audiences were still very interested in the Planet of the Apes franchise, but they were not fully satisfied with this version. Plans for a sequel to Tim Burton's film were quickly abandoned after its release. Instead, 20th Century Fox decided to reboot the franchise once again with a completely new direction. Writers Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver developed a fresh story, which eventually became Rise of the Planet of the Apes in 2011. The film was directed by Rupert Wyatt. This reboot took inspiration from earlier films in the franchise, particularly Escape from the Planet of the Apes and Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. One of the biggest changes in this new version was the use of advanced motion capture technology instead of traditional makeup. This allowed the apes to feel more realistic and emotionally expressive. The story introduced Caesar, a highly intelligent ape who becomes the leader of a new civilization and plays a key role in the Rise of the Apes. When Rise of the Planet of the Apes hit theaters in 2011, it quickly became clear that the franchise was far from dead and that audiences were still deeply interested in its story. Unlike the 2001 reboot, Rise received a much more positive response, and strong word of mouth helped drive the film to a $54 million opening weekend. The movie showed impressive box office stamina, eventually earning around $176 million in North America and approximately $470 million worldwide, all on a budget of about $96 million. This marked a major turning point for the franchise, successfully reviving it and setting a strong foundation for future films. Although it was not the highest-grossing movie of the year, it proved to be a smart and effective reboot, with a compelling story and emotional depth that audiences connected with. Some analysts pointed out that while later summers became crowded with sequels and franchise films, Rise stood out because of its quality and strong narrative. The film's success left the franchise in a strong position, allowing it to continue years later with new installments like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and eventually leading toward future expansions of the story. Moving forward, the next major chapter in the modern trilogy takes the story even further. The most recent film continues the narrative set up by the earlier entries, showing a world where the conflict between humans and apes has reached its peak. The story picks up several years after the events of Dawn, with humans and apes now fully at war. Humanity is struggling to survive, while ape civilization continues to grow stronger and more advanced. Caesar, now a seasoned and burdened leader, faces some of the toughest challenges of his life. This film was clearly designed to serve as a powerful and emotional conclusion to the modern Planet of the Apes trilogy. Meanwhile, Going back to Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, the film made a huge impact at the box office with a $73 million opening weekend. According to studio estimates, it received excellent reviews and strong audience reactions, making it one of the biggest and most successful debuts of the summer. It easily surpassed the $54 million opening of Rise of the Planet of the Apes, further proving the strength of the rebooted franchise. However, despite this strong opening, the overall summer box office still faced challenges. The weekend's total earnings were down nearly 24% compared to the same weekend the previous year. After 2 weeks at the top, Transformers: Age of Extinction dropped to second place with $16.5 million, while Melissa McCarthy's comedy continued to perform moderately. At the same time, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes continued its strong run, earning approximately $27.9 million on Friday alone and heading toward a $70 million opening weekend, which placed it ahead of its predecessor. The film went on to achieve major success, with strong domestic and worldwide earnings. It also had the advantage of being critically acclaimed, receiving very high ratings and praise for its storytelling and visual effects. The film, which had a budget of around $170 million, was directed by Matt Reeves and produced by Chernin Entertainment. Set about a decade after the events of Rise, it shows Caesar as a more mature and intelligent leader, guiding his growing ape civilization. At the same time, human survivors, played by actors like Gary Oldman and Keri Russell, are trying to rebuild their lives after a devastating global pandemic. Both sides attempt to find peace, but the situation quickly escalates into conflict. Despite strong performances from both Dawn and Transformers, the overall summer box office was still down by nearly 20%, largely due to the previous year's record-breaking success driven by films like Despicable Me 2, Grown Ups 2, and Pacific Rim. During its run, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes faced little competition from new releases, allowing it to dominate the box office for multiple weeks. Meanwhile, Transformers: Age of Extinction earned about $5 million on a Friday during its third weekend, contributing to a total of around $60 million for that weekend and pushing its domestic total close to $200 million. The film became one of the highest-grossing movies of the year. Other major films that joined the $200 million club that year included Captain America, The Winter Soldier, The Lego Movie, X-Men, Days of Future Past, Maleficent, and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Melissa McCarthy's comedy earned around $4 million on Friday and was projected to reach about $30 million in its second weekend. Meanwhile, 22 Jump Street continued its steady performance, earning around $6.2 million for the weekend and maintaining a strong overall total. Relativity Media's Earth to Echo came in fifth place with around $1.8 million. It was expected to earn approximately $5.7 million by Sunday, marking an impressive drop of only 28% and bringing its total to around $25 million. Meanwhile, the newcomer Boyhood entered the top 20 rankings. Richard Linklater's critically acclaimed film delivered a strong per-screen average of about $24,000 from just 5 locations in New York and Los Angeles. The IFC film's release, which was shot intermittently over a 12-year period, was projected to earn around $350,000 over the weekend. Now shifting focus to the story side of the Planet of the Apes franchise, particularly the fate of one of the main human characters, Jason Clarke's Malcolm. The timeline of the Planet of the Apes series can be a bit confusing, but the films released since 2011 connect together as part of a larger, continuous story. The more recent installments are set many years after the rise of Caesar, showing how his legacy continues to shape the future. In Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, Malcolm plays a crucial role as a human who believes in peace between humans and apes. He tries to build trust with Caesar and prevent conflict between the two species. However, the later film War for the Planet of the Apes does not directly reveal what happens to Malcolm. His fate is instead explained through background details and expanded story context. It is suggested that Malcolm continued living in the San Francisco area after the events of Dawn. At some point, human survivors made contact with a military group, which later became a major force in the conflict against the apes. This military group, led by the colonel, believed that apes were a threat to humanity's survival. The colonel's perspective was shaped by fear and loss, and he was determined to eliminate the apes completely. According to the story, Malcolm attempted to communicate and possibly bring peace between the apes and the military forces. However, the colonel saw this as dangerous. He believed that any hope of peace would weaken his mission. As a result, Malcolm was ultimately killed, not because he was an enemy, but because he represented the idea of coexistence, which the colonel refused to accept. The colonel was also dealing with a mutated version of the virus that threatened humanity. His actions were driven by the belief that only complete control and elimination of threats could save humans. This makes Malcolm's fate even more tragic. He was someone who truly believed in peace, yet his efforts were silenced in order to push humanity further into war. The war itself was meant to reclaim Earth for humans, but as the story unfolds in War for the Planet of the Apes, it becomes clear that the colonel's efforts ultimately fail, making Malcolm's death feel even more meaningless and heartbreaking. Interestingly, Malcolm's story mirrors that of Will Rodman from Rise of the Planet of the Apes, played by James Franco. Both characters were human allies to Caesar and played key roles in helping the apes rise and evolve. Will helped create the intelligence that allowed Caesar to grow, while Malcolm tried to build peace between humans and apes. However, both characters disappear from the story without fully shown endings. Will is believed to have died due to the virus he indirectly helped create, while Malcolm was killed as a result of human conflict and fear. These parallels highlight a deeper theme in the franchise, that even the humans who try to help or understand the apes often meet tragic ends. Although Dawn of the Planet of the Apes does not directly show the fate of these characters, the story connects back to the original 1968 film, where humans are no longer the dominant species. In that classic film, an astronaut lands on a planet ruled by intelligent apes, where humans have been reduced to a weaker state. The modern reboot, starting with Rise of the Planet of the Apes in 2011, shows how this world came to be, beginning with a scientist named Will who creates the intelligence that leads to Caesar and the rise of ape civilization. The story ends with Will saying goodbye to Caesar after the ape uprising, shocked to realize that Caesar has gained the ability to speak. This emotional moment highlights how far Caesar has evolved. In the original planned version of the film, there was a sequence where a character attempts to shoot Caesar but accidentally hits Will instead. However, this idea was changed in the final version. Instead, the movie concludes with a crucial moment where Will's neighbor, a pilot, unknowingly becomes infected with the simian flu. This leads to the rapid global spread of the virus, setting up the downfall of human civilization. James Franco's character, Will, does not appear again in later films like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. His fate is not directly shown but is strongly implied through subtle details. In Dawn, Will is only briefly referenced in a scene where Caesar watches an old video of himself as a young ape interacting with Will. This scene takes place while Caesar is hiding in Will's old house after being injured during Koba's attempted attack. From the clues shown in the film, it is heavily suggested that Will and his girlfriend Caroline were among those infected during the early stages of the virus outbreak. One major piece of evidence is the quarantine sign marked outside the front door of the house, indicating that infected individuals were inside. In the timeline of the Planet of the Apes universe, only a small number of humans are naturally immune to the virus. Another detail is that Will's car is still parked outside the house, suggesting that he never managed to escape. This strongly supports the idea that he died during the initial outbreak. According to statements from the filmmakers, Will was never intended to survive beyond the events of Rise of the Planet of the Apes. In a way, his fate serves as a consequence of unleashing the simian flu, even though his intentions were not malicious. Although there were possibilities of bringing him back in later films like War for the Planet of the Apes, this ultimately did not happen. Additional details about the story are explored in the prequel novel Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, Firestorm, released in 2014. The novel fills in gaps between Rise and Dawn, especially focusing on the character of Koba. Koba, one of the key antagonists, was previously experimented on by humans. He was part of the group of apes that Will and his team tested with the ALZ-113 drug, the same substance that gave Caesar his intelligence but also led to the creation of the simian flu. Through Koba's backstory, we see a different perspective on humans. While Caesar believes that not all humans are bad, Koba's traumatic experiences lead him to distrust and hate them. This contrast between Caesar and Koba becomes one of the central conflicts in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Koba's actions and motivations become more understandable when we consider the suffering he endured during human experiments. Originally, there were alternate story ideas where Will might have died during the ape escape sequence, but these were changed during production. In the final version, the focus remains on the outbreak of the virus caused by the infected pilot, which leads directly into the events of the later films. Once again, Will does not physically appear in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, except for that brief video scene where Caesar remembers his early bond with him. That moment serves as a reminder of the connection between humans and apes, and how everything began, although it is widely believed that Will and his girlfriend Caroline died during the virus outbreak. The films never directly confirm their fate through dialogue. However, several strong hints throughout the story point toward what likely happened to them. One of the biggest clues is the condition of Will's house. A quarantine warning sign is clearly placed outside the front door, indicating that infected individuals were inside. In the Planet of the Apes timeline, only a small portion of humanity is naturally immune to the simian flu, which strongly suggests that neither Will nor Caroline survived. This strongly implies that they were infected during the early stages of the outbreak. Another important detail is Will's car from Rise of the Planet of the Apes, which is still seen parked outside the house. The car appears abandoned, suggesting that he never had the chance to escape or leave the area. Producer Dylan Clark also hinted that Will was never intended to survive beyond the ending of Rise. In many ways, his fate can be seen as a consequence of his actions, unintentionally releasing the simian flu that ultimately led to the collapse of human civilization. Even though his death is never shown on screen, these visual clues make his fate quite clear. While it might have been possible for the filmmakers to bring Will back in later installments like War for the Planet of the Apes, that idea was never pursued. James Franco only appears in Rise of the Planet of the Apes, with a brief presence in Dawn through archival footage and references. Despite this, his character remains extremely important because he is the one responsible for creating the virus that reshaped the world. Director Rupert Wyatt played a key role in reviving the Planet of the Apes franchise with Rise of the Planet of the Apes, especially after nearly a decade of inactivity following Tim Burton's 2001 version, which received mixed to negative reactions. However, Wyatt chose not to return for the sequel, which led 20th Century Fox to begin searching for a new director. Matt Reeves quickly emerged as a strong choice, particularly due to his previous success and his development deal with the studio. Soon after, reports confirmed that Reeves had officially been selected to direct the next installment, with production scheduled to begin in order to meet the planned release date. Development for Dawn of the Planet of the Apes began almost immediately after the success of Rise. Even before the film had an official title, writers Rick Jaffa and Amanda Silver were brought in to start working on the script. Later, Mark Bomback joined the project to revise and expand the screenplay, helping to further shape the story. The direction of the sequel was clear. It would focus on the aftermath of the deadly virus created by humans, directly continuing the events from the ending of Rise. The script was described as a natural continuation of the first film, smoothly transitioning into a darker, more apocalyptic world while expanding the scale of the story. Andy Serkis returned as Caesar, continuing his role as the highly intelligent and evolved ape leader. Since most of the human characters from Rise were no longer alive due to the virus, the sequel introduced a new set of human characters. Naturally, James Franco's character did not return, as his story had already reached its implied conclusion. Rupert Wyatt's direction in Rise was widely praised for blending multiple genres, including prison escape, emotional drama, and science fiction, all told from the perspective of a non-human protagonist. However, some critics felt that certain aspects of the script could have been stronger, leaving room for improvement in the sequel. Matt Reeves brought a different approach to Dawn. While he was known for his character-driven storytelling and controlled use of visual effects, he had relatively less experience with large-scale blockbuster filmmaking. Despite this, his direction resulted in a more emotionally powerful and visually stunning sequel. By focusing on deep characters, realistic conflict, and meaningful themes, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes managed to improve upon its predecessor in several important ways. And despite having a somewhat unusual title, the film received widespread praise from critics and went on to achieve major success at the box office. Have to admit, I'm honestly surprised at how this franchise has managed to come back to life. I absolutely love the original 1968 classic, but to be honest, it never seemed like the kind of series that would appeal to modern audiences, especially younger viewers today. When the franchise was rebooted in 2011, and it ended up making strong money at the box office, it proved many people wrong. And of course, when a film performs that well financially, a sequel is almost guaranteed. I did enjoy the first installment of the reboot, but I personally didn't see it as the masterpiece that many others considered it to be. This time around, however, we have a new director, while the writing team remains the same, and you can feel that continuity right from the beginning. The movie opens in a very familiar way, with news footage explaining the state of the world after the events of the first film. It quickly brings the audience up to speed. Caesar is now the leader of a large colony of apes living in the forest outside what used to be San Francisco. These apes share Caesar's intelligence, and we see this reflected in many ways, from their communication to their organized way of life. Most of the apes believe that humans are now extinct, until they suddenly encounter a small group of human survivors deep in the forest. This group turns out to be part of a remaining human community trying to survive. Their energy resources are running out, and they desperately need power. A nearby hydroelectric dam could solve their problem, but there's a catch. That dam is located right in the middle of the apes' territory. And that's where the real conflict begins. One of the most fascinating aspects of this film is the political tension, not just between humans and apes, but also within each group. There are disagreements, mistrust, and internal conflicts on both sides. Caesar struggles to make the right decisions as a leader, trying to maintain peace while protecting his kind. On the human side, Malcolm, the leader of the small survivor group, sees something special in Caesar and tries to build trust with him. But not everyone shares that perspective. Some humans remain fearful and hostile, believing that apes cannot be trusted. At the same time, Caesar's second-in-command, Koba, has deep emotional scars from past human abuse and strongly opposes any cooperation with them. All of this is presented in a way that highlights the similarities between humans and apes. At its core, the film explores universal themes: family, fear, survival, leadership, and trust. These themes are reflected equally in both species, making the story feel more grounded and relatable. But perhaps the most impressive achievement of the film is how it conveys emotion through the apes. Every expression, whether it's love, anger, sadness, or frustration, feels incredibly real. A lot of this is supported by advanced visual effects and makeup, but the real credit goes to the motion capture performances. Andy Serkis delivers an absolutely outstanding performance as Caesar. Honestly, this is the kind of work that deserves major awards recognition. And he's not alone. The entire performance team does an incredible job bringing these characters to life. Now, while the film is highly entertaining and never feels boring, there are still a few things that prevent it from being truly perfect. At times, the story follows some familiar plot patterns that we've seen in many other films. Certain moments feel predictable, and some narrative choices don't feel entirely fresh. Honestly, I was surprised by how many moments in this film felt similar to things I've seen in other movies. I won't spoil anything, but certain plot points really stood out in a way that made parts of the story feel predictable. I also felt that some of the emotional moments were a bit too obvious and slightly heavy-handed. But what's interesting is that, despite this, those moments still worked for me. Even when I knew what the film was trying to do, I still found myself emotionally affected by it. And that's what makes this film so impressive. Despite those familiar elements, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is still a highly entertaining movie. The story and action kept me fully engaged from start to finish. I stayed connected to the characters, and the pacing of the film was nearly perfect. There's always something happening, whether it's a major action sequence, a powerful emotional moment, or strong character interaction. The performances are so compelling that this becomes yet another big-budget 2014 blockbuster that truly delivers. That being said, I do wish the story had taken a few more risks and explored its ideas in a more unique way. There are so many aspects of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes that deserve attention: the motion capture technology, the environment and production design, and the complex internal politics of both humans and apes. In all of these areas, the film is a true cinematic achievement. And of course, we can't ignore Andy Serkis' performance as Caesar, which stands out as one of the most powerful and memorable performances in modern cinema. While all of these elements are worth discussing, there is one aspect of the film that I find especially fascinating: its use of sign language, subtitles, and spoken dialogue as tools for dramatic storytelling. Every film uses dialogue to convey meaning, but here, the use of communication goes much deeper. The way characters speak, or choose not to speak, carries emotional and narrative weight beyond just words. Some films use subtitles for humor, like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, but in this film, language becomes a key part of the story itself. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes centers around the conflict between human survivors in San Francisco and the ape community led by Caesar. Early in the film, there are two scenes that closely mirror each other, one in the human settlement and one in the ape village. Both scenes focus on how each group responds to the idea of coexistence. Neither side truly wants war, but both are willing to fight to survive. What makes these scenes so powerful is the contrast between the two cultures. In Caesar's village, the apes communicate through a mix of sign language and controlled speech. There is a sense of order, individuals take turns, they listen to each other, and discussions happen in a more structured and respectful way. When Koba tries to push the apes toward war, Caesar asserts his authority. At one point, Caesar even silences the chaos with a powerful display, restoring control before continuing the discussion calmly. In this society, spoken words are used carefully, and communication feels deliberate and meaningful. In contrast, the human settlement is much more chaotic. When the humans gather to discuss their situation, everyone is talking over each other. There is fear, frustration, and urgency. Leaders struggle to maintain control, and at one point, a megaphone is needed just to get people to listen. Malcolm, who wants to restore power through the hydroelectric dam, has difficulty even being heard among the noise. These two scenes highlight a key difference: the role of communication. In the ape society, communication is controlled and thoughtful. In the human society, it is loud, emotional, and often disorganized. And that contrast becomes a powerful storytelling tool. Dreyfus is barely able to maintain any real control over the human population. The only thing holding everything together is the fear of complete chaos and internal violence. In contrast, within the ape society, we see how Caesar handles leadership very differently. Even when tensions rise, Caesar allows all apes to communicate their thoughts and ideas, encouraging listening and understanding rather than dominance. This contrast in communication is what makes Dawn of the Planet of the Apes so impactful. It's not just about conflict, it's about culture, and specifically, the culture of communication. In the third act, the film takes this idea even further, reinforcing the theme of speech as a form of power, and even violence. Warning: I'll briefly touch on spoilers here. Koba violently seizes control by overthrowing Caesar and declaring himself leader. From that moment on, he pushes the apes toward war to secure his authority. Unlike Caesar, Koba changes the way communication works within the ape colony. He reduces open dialogue and instead controls the narrative, using Caesar's name and legacy to manipulate others. Communication becomes less about listening and more about control. This shift transforms speech into a tool of dominance. Throughout the film, leadership is shown as a choice, whether to listen or to impose. Koba chooses fear and violence, ruling through intimidation and emotional manipulation. Malcolm, on the other hand, leads with curiosity and trust. His approach allows humans and apes to connect, even if only briefly. Dreyfus tries to lead through promises of safety, but ultimately fails to gain true trust from his people. And finally, Caesar stands as the strongest example of leadership, choosing peace, restraint, and understanding above all else. Apes do not kill apes becomes more than just a rule, it becomes a philosophy. Caesar's refusal to embrace violence creates a society where every voice has value. There are very few blockbuster films that communicate so much meaning through something as subtle as language. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes uses communication not just as dialogue, but as a storytelling device to explore leadership, culture, and morality. In a world where leadership is constantly being questioned, this film feels even more relevant. It shows how the smallest choices, like how we speak and listen, can define entire civilizations. Film, as a medium, becomes powerful when all these elements come together to create something deeper. Whether this creative decision came from the director Matt Reeves, actor Andy Serkis, or writers Mark Bomback, Rick Jaffa, and Amanda Silver, its impact on the film is undeniable. In my opinion, this is what makes Planet of the Apes such a special franchise. It's not just entertainment, it's meaningful storytelling. The story of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes takes place several years after the previous film. Humanity has been nearly wiped out by a deadly virus known as the simian flu, a byproduct of the drug that gave apes their intelligence. Caesar has now established a strong ape colony in the forests outside San Francisco. Much like War for the Planet of the Apes, the film is built around the growing tension between humans and apes. There is a constant sense of unease, as both sides struggle to survive while fearing each other. Caesar continues to grow as a character, showing intelligence, emotional depth, and strong leadership. The writing does an excellent job of portraying him as a complex figure, someone who still believes in peace, despite the challenges he faces. At the same time, both humans and apes have aggressive factions that believe only one species can rule the planet. And that belief is what ultimately drives the conflict forward. This constant struggle between peace and equality not only mirrors modern society, but also makes Planet of the Apes feel incredibly relevant. I'll be honest, I was a bit behind on my summer blockbusters this year, but word of mouth brought me back to this franchise. Some films in the series have been brilliant, some have been disappointing, and others had great concepts but were poorly executed. This latest installment, and the second in the current reboot series, follows a very familiar setup. Human civilization has collapsed, and both humans and apes have managed to create their own sense of home and peace. But that peace is fragile. Everything changes when both sides discover that they are not alone, that San Francisco is still inhabited. This realization leads both factions toward an inevitable collision. Like many great films, this is ultimately a character-driven story. From the trailers, this might surprise some viewers, but it's actually a very welcome and refreshing approach. The film explores deeply emotional themes, love versus fear. The love for one's own kind, and the fear of what is different. And that fear can lead to very dark consequences. As soon as intelligent beings begin to think, analyze, and make decisions based on past experiences, fear becomes inevitable. Even when we hope for the best, we often prepare for the worst. I don't want to reveal too much, but the story is incredibly engaging. If the plot doesn't pull you in, then the performances definitely will. Gary Oldman, for example, is a phenomenal actor who always brings intensity to his roles. Although he doesn't get as much screen time as you might expect, every moment he appears on screen is powerful and memorable. Jason Clarke also deserves a lot of credit. He's a highly underrated actor who adds depth to what could have easily been a one-dimensional character. His role as Malcolm is layered. Yes, he represents peace, but you can also feel the pain and loss he carries. We've talked about the human characters, but the apes absolutely deserve equal recognition. Their performances are nothing short of incredible. The body language, expressions, and emotional depth are astonishing. While CGI plays a role, it would mean nothing without the actors behind it. Andy Serkis, in particular, delivers a performance that is truly Oscar-worthy. Another standout performance comes from Toby Kebbell as Kodi, who completely steals every scene he's in. His presence is intense, emotional, and unforgettable. If you ever saw him and Gary Oldman acting together in a scene, it would be something extraordinary. The technology used in the film is flawless. Motion capture is used perfectly, but it's only one part of what makes this film visually stunning. The environments also deserve recognition, from dense forests to the ruins of San Francisco. Everything feels detailed and immersive. All of these elements make the film great, but what truly elevates it is the direction. There are long sequences where almost no words are spoken, and yet the story continues to move forward through sign language and visual storytelling. And it works beautifully. These scenes communicate emotions and ideas in ways that dialogue alone simply cannot. The cinematography is also impressive, especially during the climactic battle. There are wide panoramic shots that capture so much detail in just a few seconds, making the scale of the conflict feel real and intense. The film also includes subtle callbacks to earlier entries in the franchise, adding depth for longtime fans. It's easy to see why a third film in the series was quickly planned. Hopefully, the next installment continues this level of emotional storytelling, combining powerful drama, intense action, and stunning visuals. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes serves as a strong follow-up to the surprisingly emotional rise of the Planet of the Apes. Once again, we are taken deeper into a universe that has been developing for over 50 years. The earlier films hinted at a future where humans lost control of the planet, and now, we are finally seeing how that future came to be. The story picks up shortly after the events of Rise, beginning with a news montage that reminds us of the devastating simian flu outbreak. From there, we are drawn into a new world, one where Caesar leads a thriving ape community. Now with a family of his own, Caesar is focused on maintaining peace, both within his colony and with the remaining human survivors. The human group, based in San Francisco, is led by Malcolm, who acts as a moral center in the story. What makes the film even more impressive is that it allows us to sympathize with both sides. There are no clear villains, only different perspectives, shaped by fear, survival, and experience. Fair to say that the film succeeds in presenting both sides, humans and apes, as equally complex. During the intense conflict between them, I honestly didn't know who to support, and it didn't feel right rooting against either side. In fact, I found myself wanting the fighting to stop altogether, even though the action sequences themselves are incredibly entertaining, especially moments like apes riding horses while firing machine guns. While the battles in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes may not reach the same iconic level as the Golden Gate Bridge sequence in Rise, they still deliver strong impact. What makes them different is that this is no longer a simple good versus bad situation. Both sides have their reasons for fighting. Both are trying to survive. And neither can be fully blamed for the conflict. If there's one thing that absolutely deserves recognition, it's Andy Serkis' performance. He truly deserved an Oscar long before this, even for his work as Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. He came close with Rise of the Planet of the Apes, but with Dawn, he absolutely deserves at least a nomination. You can clearly see how much Serkis has evolved with the character of Caesar. He's no longer just a curious, intelligent ape, he's now a burdened, emotional leader carrying the weight of his entire species. His performance is incredibly layered. Every movement, from his eyes, to his facial expressions, to his body language, communicates emotion in a way that feels completely real. It's not just acting, it's a full physical performance. Toby Kebbell, who plays Koba, also delivers a remarkable performance. His character, shaped by years of abuse and experimentation, carries deep emotional scars. Koba's anger and hatred feel justified, even when his actions become extreme. That's what makes him such a compelling and dangerous character. If there's one minor weakness in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, it's that the human characters don't quite match the depth of the ape characters. But this can be forgiven, because the apes have always been the main focus of the franchise. The film builds upon the strong foundation established in Rise of the Planet of the Apes, expanding both the world and the characters. Even if you're already familiar with the franchise, or have picked up on its story through pop culture, you may have an idea of where things are heading. Still, the film manages to present that story in a meaningful and intelligent way. It's a smart summer blockbuster, something that's becoming increasingly rare. Yes, it has those big cinematic moments, like apes on horseback firing machine guns, but it also carries deeper themes and emotional weight. That being said, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is not necessarily the savior of the 2014 summer box office, even though many people try to position it that way. Visually, the film is stunning. The structure is similar to Rise, balancing exposition with character-driven storytelling, while also drawing inspiration from earlier entries in the franchise. The film works because of its strong performances, especially from Andy Serkis and Toby Kebbell. Koba, in particular, stands out as one of the most memorable villains of the year. His backstory and motivations bring intensity and realism to the narrative. However, the simplicity of the story might leave some viewers wondering if it could have explored more complex ideas. At times, Koba's aggressive nature lacks a direct counterpart on the human side, which creates a slight imbalance. While there are aggressive humans, they don't feel as developed or as compelling as Koba. In fact, none of the human characters are as engaging as even a single ape character. That being said, the visual effects in this film are nothing short of incredible. Without exaggeration, they are some of the best ever seen in cinema. Still, one might wish that the story itself had been just a bit more layered to match the level of its visuals. In Rise of the Planet of the Apes, James Franco's character, Will Rodman, provided an emotional anchor for the story. His relationship with Caesar added a personal and human element that grounded the film's central conflict. Similarly, his internal struggle, whether it was right to sacrifice freedom for the sake of human health, added depth and complexity. That perspective helped both sides feel understandable and justified. And that's what made the conflict so powerful. Neither side felt completely right or completely wrong. On the other hand, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes removes much of the personal connection to the human characters. As a result, the film feels more like a beautifully crafted ape-centered drama, with the human side sometimes feeling less developed in comparison. While the film may have stronger visual effects and a darker atmosphere, it doesn't fully reach the emotional depth that its predecessor achieved. I always appreciate when filmmakers bring strong human elements into a story, because it helps the audience connect emotionally. But in this case, that emotional depth is mostly limited to Caesar and the ape colony. The emotional weight radiates from them, while the human characters feel somewhat left out. Looking at the film overall, it feels like there were ideas and layers that could have been explored further, both on the human side and the ape side, but not enough time was given to fully develop them. In the original series, ape society was structured around a class system rather than gender roles. There was even a strong female chimpanzee character who played an important role, showing that the earlier films explored these dynamics in interesting ways. In contrast, Dawn focuses more on survival and power, particularly humanity's attempt to regain what it has lost. Gary Oldman's character represents this idea strongly, as he is driven by the desire to restore human dominance. This works well when viewed as a power struggle between humans and apes. However, it also raises questions about where the story should go next. Ideally, the sequel would explore the aftermath of the conflict and focus on rebuilding rather than jumping straight into another large-scale war. But it's clear that the tension between humans and apes is leading toward an inevitable confrontation. The more I watched the film, the more I found myself disconnecting from the human characters. At times, the dialogue felt weak and even frustrating. There are moments that come across as unintentionally awkward, for example, when a character reacts dramatically to obvious situations in a way that feels forced. Some reviews suggest that the film presents a balanced perspective between humans and apes, but I don't fully agree with that. It only appears balanced because there are fewer clearly evil human characters compared to Rise. In reality, the human side feels underdeveloped rather than equally strong. We don't have strong reasons to care deeply about them, while the apes are much more fleshed out and emotionally engaging. There are also characters whose motivations feel unclear. For example, extreme hatred toward the apes is shown without enough background or explanation. While it's believable that fear exists, the film doesn't spend enough time exploring why certain characters feel the way they do. Because of this, we are left to fill in the gaps ourselves. Similarly, some characters feel underwritten. For instance, one character is both associated with the CDC and also acts as a surgeon. While not impossible, it feels more like a convenient writing choice rather than a fully thought-out character background. References to real-life figures like Jane Goodall could have inspired a more grounded and believable human character, someone who truly understands apes and bridges the gap between species. In reality, the only humans who would realistically interact closely with intelligent apes would be scientists or researchers who study them. That could have added more depth and realism to the story. Despite these issues, the film still succeeds in many areas, particularly in its exploration of internal conflict and character struggle. This rebooted franchise itself is an example of a second attempt at reviving a series that many believed had already run its course. Director Rupert Wyatt surprised audiences with Rise of the Planet of the Apes, delivering one of the most emotionally engaging entries in the franchise. Rise didn't rely heavily on traditional social commentary. Instead, it focused on characters, storytelling, and a careful balance of tension and payoff. This turned what could have been a simple concept into something meaningful and uplifting. That emotional impact was largely driven by Caesar's journey, a sympathetic protagonist leading a rebellion that felt justified. Importantly, the collapse of human civilization was only briefly shown in the ending, leaving much of the darker consequences implied rather than explored in detail. This was a smart storytelling choice, but it also meant that any sequel would naturally have to deal with much heavier and darker themes. And that's exactly what Dawn of the Planet of the Apes does. This sequel takes a much darker and more mature approach to the story. And while that shift in tone may not work for everyone, it is not necessarily a bad thing. Having said that, I will give Dawn of the Planet of the Apes credit. It executes its story far more effectively than many other franchise sequels or remakes. Although that may sound like faint praise, it still deserves recognition. Much like some of the later films in the original series, Dawn picks up years after a catastrophic event that wipes out most of humanity. It follows a small community of apes trying to build and maintain a functioning society in the wilderness. As with those earlier films, much of the drama comes from this fragile society, especially through Caesar's struggle to maintain peace after a group of potentially dangerous humans disrupt the delicate balance of the ape community. Both versions of this story include a key conflict, Caesar facing opposition from within, particularly from a more aggressive ape who ultimately chooses war over coexistence. Interestingly, both films even open with ape children being taught their society's core rule: apes do not kill apes. A powerful and noble idea, but one that proves impossible to uphold. It's not entirely clear why the filmmakers chose to reference or pay homage to some of the lesser-known entries in the original franchise, films that many audiences barely remember. In fact, this might have been one situation where ignoring parts of the older canon would have worked just as well, if not better. But if the intention was to improve upon those earlier ideas, then it definitely succeeds, because Dawn handles these themes with far more depth and seriousness. On one level, I really admire how sincerely the filmmakers approach the story. The film brings the franchise back into the realm of political allegory. In the previous film, the apes were more like mistreated animals. Here, they are a fully developed society, one that exists on almost equal footing with humans. The tension between these two groups doesn't come from clear right or wrong. Instead, it comes from fear of losing everything they've built. Each side views the other as a threat, even when both are simply trying to survive. It's easy to interpret this as a metaphor for real-world conflicts, but the film keeps it broad enough to apply to many different situations where fear, mistrust, and anger divide communities. However, this heavy focus on social commentary also creates a very serious and sometimes overly heavy tone, which can occasionally work against the emotional impact of the story. The film opens by showing the peaceful world the apes have created, a kind of natural utopia. You would expect this moment to feel warm and hopeful, giving the audience a sense of what's at stake. But instead, the same dark and serious tone used in later battle scenes is applied here as well. Because of this, the emotional contrast isn't as strong as it could have been. We understand that this world is important, but we don't always feel why it matters. This issue becomes noticeable right from the very first scene. The film begins with a close-up of Caesar's intense gaze. At first, it feels like we're about to witness a massive war sequence. But then, the scene shifts into something quieter, a more grounded moment showing the daily life of the apes, similar in tone to films like Dances with Wolves or The Last of the Mohicans. This scene is meant to show the apes working together, living peacefully, and supporting their community. However, because of the way it's presented, with the same visual intensity as a battle, the emotional impact doesn't fully land. The transition feels slightly off, and the deeper dramatic meaning doesn't resonate as strongly as it could have. The film's color palette leans heavily toward cold, gray tones, especially in the forest scenes. Combined with the intense and often aggressive background score, many moments feel more like the climax of a dark horror film rather than a balanced emotional narrative. This tonal imbalance, at least for me, makes it harder to fully connect emotionally with the characters. It also doesn't help that Andy Serkis Caesar, who was the central focus of the previous film, feels somewhat reduced in the first half of this movie. He is still technically the main character, but the film introduces so many new characters and side conflicts that Caesar often ends up feeling like a supporting figure in his own story. This clearly comes from good intentions. Matt Reeves is trying to expand the world and make it more complex and layered. However, in doing so, he spends a lot of time developing new characters who don't always receive enough depth, while the characters we are already invested in sometimes feel pushed to the side. Then there's Kodi. His character is portrayed in a very direct way, almost as a symbol of pure aggression. His physical scars, which come from his past suffering, are used visually to emphasize his darker nature. In some ways, he resembles a classic villain archetype, similar to Scar from The Lion King, though without the same level of charisma or subtlety. That being said, once the film fully embraces its darker tone and moves toward its tragic climax, it becomes far more engaging. The tension builds, and the story gains emotional weight. Still, when the film tries to introduce lighter or more hopeful moments, they don't always land as effectively because of the overall heavy tone. As a whole, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes remains a strong follow-up to its predecessor. Most of its flaws come from ambitious ideas and good intentions rather than poor execution. But it does make you wonder how the film might have turned out if Rupert Wyatt had remained in the director's chair. Rise of the Planet of the Apes had the potential to explore darker themes as well, but it balanced them with a sense of warmth and emotional connection. That balance is important. If you want truly powerful, gut-wrenching moments, you need contrast, moments of light to make the darkness feel even deeper. Dawn does deliver some emotional punches, but it also moves closer to the darker, more nihilistic tone seen in some of the older 1970s films. Another key difference comes in the music. Patrick Doyle's score for Rise was deeply connected to the emotional journey of the film. It supported the storytelling and enhanced every dramatic moment. In Dawn, composer Michael Giacchino takes a different approach. He experiments with sound and texture, creating a more atmospheric and intense musical style. There are moments where the score is truly impressive and unique. However, it feels like the music is trying to pay homage to the older films in the franchise, especially the 1968 original, by bringing back that unsettling, almost chaotic tone. The problem is that this approach doesn't always fit the emotional needs of the story being told here. In the original 1968 film, that kind of music worked perfectly because the story was about confusion, fear, and survival in a completely unfamiliar world. The audience experienced the story from the perspective of a human thrown into a terrifying and alien environment. Because of that, the music didn't need to follow a traditional emotional arc, it only needed to create tension and unease. But in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, the story is more character-driven. It's about relationships, conflict, and emotional depth. And because of that, the music sometimes feels disconnected from what's happening on screen. Unlike the original Planet of the Apes, this story does not take place on a completely alien world. It features characters we are meant to connect with on an emotional level. However, the film's score sometimes works against that connection. At times, the music feels disconnected, almost like a different film's soundtrack has been placed over this one. The use of harsh tones and layered sound design creates emotional distance, and in some moments, it even becomes distracting. To be fair, there is one exception, a softer musical theme used in what are meant to be emotional scenes. But even that theme has its issues. Rather than feeling like a fully developed melody, it comes across as a series of simple piano notes, played slowly without much variation. It feels incomplete, like the beginning of a melody that was never fully developed. It's the kind of music often heard in light, sentimental films, and unfortunately, it doesn't quite match the emotional depth this story is aiming for. The bigger problem is that this same musical idea is repeated over and over again, especially during quieter or emotional moments. Normally, a simple theme can be effective if it evolves alongside the story. But here, there is very little development. Even as the relationships between characters grow and change, the music remains mostly the same. Scenes that should feel emotionally rich, moments of connection, reflection, or peace end up lacking impact because the score doesn't adapt to the narrative. Even the more complex parts of the soundtrack suffer from this issue. The music during the opening hunt sequence sounds very similar to the music used during the climactic battle. While this doesn't ruin the scenes, it doesn't enhance them either. It fails to add emotional depth or give us insight into what the characters are feeling internally. Overall, the score becomes one of the key elements that prevents the film from reaching its full dramatic potential. That said, the film still has many strengths. The story is well constructed, the performances are strong, and the third act delivers large-scale action that reaches the epic level fans expect from this franchise. But surprisingly, the music may be one of the weaker aspects of the film. Despite good intentions, it doesn't offer deeper emotional insight or contrast. Instead, it sometimes feels like it's trying to imitate earlier films rather than supporting this story's unique identity. It relies more on callbacks and familiar sounds instead of building something new. Still, it's important to remember how audiences reacted back in 2011 when Rise of the Planet of the Apes was released. Many people were unsure about the reboot, but the film turned out to be a huge success and exceeded expectations. Naturally, that success created high expectations for Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. And in many ways, Dawn delivers. Visually, the film is even more impressive. The apes look more realistic, more expressive, and more alive than ever before. The motion capture performances continue to push boundaries, with apes running, climbing, riding horses, and even using weapons in ways that feel believable. At the same time, there were hopes that the sequel would improve in other areas, especially in terms of human characters and storytelling consistency. Some of those expectations were not fully met. However, despite these shortcomings, the film still succeeds as a highly engaging and entertaining experience. Director Matt Reeves takes over from Rupert Wyatt and brings a more intense and action-driven approach. The story picks up after the virus outbreak caused by the simian flu, the same virus that spread at the end of Rise. Human civilization has collapsed, and the remaining survivors struggle to rebuild. Meanwhile, Caesar, once again brought to life brilliantly by Andy Serkis, leads a powerful and organized ape society. The opening sequence, where the apes hunt together in the forest, is particularly impressive. Watching them move as a unit, swinging through trees, communicating, and working together, is a clear example of how far visual effects have come. It's a moment that truly shows what modern filmmaking can achieve in the digital era. Unlike Rise, which was mostly contained and studio-focused, Dawn expands into real-world environments. Matt Reeves and cinematographer Michael Saracen bring the story into natural settings, using advanced technology to create a more immersive and realistic experience. The forest setting, standing in for a post-apocalyptic Northern California, looks absolutely stunning. The visual effects are so impressive that they make you appreciate just how far filmmaking has come. When comparing this to Rise of the Planet of the Apes, which was the first film in this rebooted series, my main issues with that film were mostly related to the somewhat underdeveloped human characters and a slightly uneven script that leaned toward familiar Hollywood storytelling. But in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, the focus has clearly shifted, and Caesar is now rightfully at the center of the story. Over the past 10 years, humanity has been nearly wiped out by the virus. Meanwhile, the apes have flourished in the forests north of San Francisco, building a structured and thriving society. They've essentially created their own civilization, living among the trees, waterfalls, and natural landscapes. The apes communicate using a combination of limited speech, sign language, and body movements. And what's truly impressive is how much of this film relies on subtitles, something you wouldn't normally expect from a big summer blockbuster. Within their community, ape children attend school, where they are taught important values, including the central rule, apes do not kill apes. This idea becomes incredibly important as the story unfolds. At first, their world feels almost like a peaceful paradise. But that peace is disrupted when a group of human survivors arrives. These humans are part of a small group that managed to survive the simian flu. What makes this encounter so compelling is Caesar's reaction. He doesn't immediately respond with aggression. Instead, he shows caution, curiosity, and even a sense of fear. A lot has been said about Andy Serkis' performance, and rightfully so. Combined with groundbreaking visual effects, his motion capture performance brings Caesar to life in a way that feels completely real. Honestly, it's hard to think of a better performance in this kind of role. Caesar is older now, wiser, and carries a heavy sense of responsibility. You can see it in every movement, in his eyes, his expressions, and even the way he stands. He's not just leading his people, he's protecting his family and guiding his son into adulthood. That emotional weight is always present. The relationship between Caesar and Malcolm is another strong element of the film. Despite being from completely different worlds, they share similar values and understand each other on a deeper level. The film also brings back several important ape characters from the previous movie, characters that could have easily been replaced, but instead are expanded and given more depth. Apes like Koba, Maurice, and Rocket all play significant roles in shaping the story. This adds richness to Caesar's world and makes the narrative feel more complete. In Rise, the story relied heavily on a human perspective through James Franco's character. But in Dawn, it becomes clear that this is no longer necessary. This is now a franchise led by its non-human characters. That being said, Will Rodman is still acknowledged in subtle and emotional ways, reminding us of how everything began. At the same time, Dawn introduces one of the most memorable characters in the entire series, Koba. Originally portrayed in the first film as a victim of human experimentation, Koba now plays a much larger role in the story. His past trauma shapes his personality. He was subjected to painful experiments, leaving both physical scars and emotional wounds. Because of this, he develops a deep hatred for humans. And honestly, it's hard not to understand why. The relationship between Caesar and Koba becomes one of the most powerful dynamics in the film. While Caesar believes in peace and coexistence, Koba believes that humans are a threat that must be eliminated. This difference in perspective creates tension that builds throughout the story. At one point, after being confronted, Koba even shows submission, asking for forgiveness in a way that reveals his inner conflict. There are also subtle callbacks to earlier moments in the franchise, adding more depth to the decisions characters make in this film. While the performances of the 8 characters are outstanding, it's also important to recognize the technical achievement behind them. This film features a large number of apes interacting in complex environments, fighting, riding horses, and moving naturally in outdoor settings. This is extremely difficult to achieve, and yet it looks seamless. There are several unforgettable sequences, especially during the large-scale battle scenes. Seeing apes on horseback, engaging in combat, feels both surreal and incredibly exciting. These moments capture the same sense of wonder that audiences must have felt when watching the original films decades ago. Director Matt Reeves also uses visual storytelling effectively to create beautiful and memorable images. Even simple scenes, like apes fishing by a river, are presented with a level of detail and atmosphere that makes them feel meaningful. These quiet moments add depth to the world and balance out the larger, more intense sequences. As for the human cast, unfortunately, actors like Gary Oldman and Keri Russell feel somewhat underutilized due to the film's many moving parts. Oldman, in particular, seems to disappear for a significant portion of the movie. However, when they are on screen, both actors deliver moments that feel emotionally genuine and grounded. Jason Clarke, who plays Malcolm, is given a stronger role. His character adds emotional depth, showing that even in a broken world, there are still people who hold on to hope, even something as simple as wanting to be a comic book artist. There are also subtle references woven into the film, such as nods to works like Black Hole, which add an extra layer for attentive viewers. These references never feel forced, instead, they flow naturally within the story. Rather than relying on obvious callbacks, the director chooses a more subtle approach. There are no flashy or exaggerated references to older films, only quiet hints through atmosphere, tone, and music. Michael Giacchino's score, combined with the film's visual style, creates a sense of tension, memory, and lingering fear. The ending, in particular, feels true to the spirit of the Planet of the Apes franchise, thoughtful, emotional, and impactful. At its core, what makes a great Planet of the Apes film is its willingness to explore real-world issues through its story. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes does exactly that. Yes, it's exciting, thrilling, and visually stunning, but it also carries deeper meaning. This is the kind of film that entertains while also challenging the audience to think. It's a blockbuster with substance. And because of that, it earns its place as one of the standout films of its time, a movie that audiences will return to, and one that builds anticipation for future installments. The franchise has truly returned to form, delivering a film that works both as a large-scale summer blockbuster and as intelligent science fiction with emotional depth. One of the highest compliments you can give the film is that it remains engaging and impactful, even as it continues a long-running story. At a certain point, you stop being amazed by the technical brilliance, especially the performance capture work of Andy Serkis as Caesar, because you become fully invested in the characters themselves. You're no longer thinking about how it was made. You're simply experiencing the story. The film draws you in completely, pulling you through a journey filled with tension, emotion, and conflict. The visual effects, which once felt groundbreaking, now become almost invisible, blending seamlessly into the storytelling. That's the real achievement. Director Matt Reeves doesn't rely on spectacle alone. Instead, he uses technology as a tool to support the story, not define it. He wants the audience to focus on the characters, the emotions, and the choices being made. Taking over after Rupert Wyatt's departure, Reeves shifts the tone slightly, grounding the story more in realism. He places the apes within natural environments, giving the world a more physical and believable presence. Of course, the film still builds toward a large-scale climax, where action and spectacle take center stage. But even then, it maintains a balance between visual intensity and emotional storytelling. There's also an interesting contrast at play. A film built on advanced digital technology creates a world where human technology has largely collapsed. The setting, including locations like the abandoned hydroelectric dam, reinforces this idea. This becomes a key point in the story. A group of human survivors, led by Malcolm, seeks to restore power using the dam. Despite the fragile and uncertain relationship between humans and apes, they attempt to work together. But that trust is fragile. Both Caesar and Malcolm are portrayed as leaders who value family, responsibility, and peace. Yet both are forced to confront the harsh reality that fear and prejudice exist on both sides. Ultimately, the story shows how easily cooperation can fall apart when mistrust and violence take over. Following the success of Rise of the Planet of the Apes, which received strong reviews, earned hundreds of millions worldwide, and even received an Oscar nomination for its visual effects, the franchise was in a strong position. Instead of simply repeating the formula of the previous film, the creators chose to take a different direction. Writers Rick Jaffa, Amanda Silver, and Mark Bomback shaped Dawn into a more serious, character-driven drama, focusing on the deeper conflict between humans and apes. The story takes place about a decade after the events of Rise. Through an opening montage of global news reports, we learn that the ALZ-113 virus has wiped out most of humanity, leaving only a small fraction of survivors. Now, the virus itself is no longer the main threat. Instead, the real danger comes from the struggle for survival, as the remaining humans and the rising ape civilization compete for limited resources in a fragile and broken world. So overall, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes proves that a blockbuster can be both visually stunning and emotionally powerful. It's not just about action, it's about choices, leadership, and the consequences of fear. This movie leaves you thinking long after it ends, and that's what makes it special. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more movie reviews and recaps. And tell me in the comments. Backhand index pointing right, whose side were you on, humans or apes? I'll see you in the next video. Clapperboard fire.